And I'm really happy to be part of the School of Travel Journalism. It's been like a year for me now teaching in the school, and it's been an amazing experience teaching in Spanish, but also in English. And it's been amazing to share with you guys. And these master classes also are a great experience for me to share what I've been researching for the past 20 years. So it's been a long time. So our masterclass today is called The Reasons for Travel in Price of Journeys and Travelers. And we're going to start by saying that there's no greater allegory, that we know about. It's the ultimate metaphor to travel and to journey. It's the metaphor for life, for death, for knowledge, and for writing. To travel is to exist, says Fernando Pessoa, the Portuguese writer, and Don Quixote also foresaw it. He who reads much and travels much sees much and knows much. I really love that quote. But travel means a lot of things. The journey means adventure, but conquest, but movement, initiation, quest, pilgrimage, escape, exodus, departure, return, crusade, discovery, exploration, migration, holidays, the embassies, the trades, the leisure, and tourism. So there are too many meanings. These are my two books, The Invention of Travel. It's written in Spanish, and Viajar y Contarlo, to travel and to tell about it. This is what I teach here in the School of Travel Journalism. And the examples, this list of examples around the when we say travel, multiplies this list. The sperm cell, for example, after a journey gives rise to life, and we can say that we mammals come to the world through a passage from our mother's womb, and birth is itself our first journey. But the journey of the sperm takes between 30 minutes and 72 hours along a path of just 19 centimeters. But if we go from the smallest to the biggest examples, we can go also to see and to regard all the animal world. And we can say that, for example, the monarch butterfly flies from Canada and the United States to Michoacan in their migration journey. And the Arctic tern, that is a very, very beautiful bird, it undertakes a journey of 18,000 kilometers just to chase 2 summers each year. And we also have the whales that travel 8,500 kilometers from the Antarctica to the Colombian Pacific to mate. And there's the Canada goose and too many species of birds of prey that visit, for example, Colombia along their migratory routes. So we have too many examples, and we can say that there are as many travelers as they are journeys throughout time. Their types are countless, because we have travelers shaped by their profession, but we also have travelers that are shaped because of the reason that drives their departure, but by their age they live in, or their threats, or by the outcome or the intention of their travels. We have heroes, as I said, as Don Quixote and Ulysses, the protagonists of epic quests and adventures. But we also have pilgrimage, who journey to sacred sites along their missionary and seeking their faith. And we also have the adventurers that drives, their adventures are driven by their desire to explore distant lands and enchanted places. And also we have the commercial travelers and the inward travelers. That is something that we are seeking all today, these inner journeys to search for answers to the life's deepest questions. And we also have, obviously, the tourists that are born in the industrialization, the globalization, and the modern times. So the examples are quite a lot, and I can say that every traveler is born from other travelers and gives birth to other travelers in turn. But we all travelers, we have in common, and we share this belonging to what I called a lineage of intrepid, of daring characters, travelers with a capital T, I said, because in those days when travel began, traveling was very, very difficult and was reserved for the few willing to risk their lives in the adventure. And to travel meant facing the unknown, encountering the barbarians, the people that they weren't familiar to, that spoke languages they didn't understand, and they followed these routes that they had. Actually, the itinerary has to be drawn along their ways because the journey had to unfold across these entirely uncharted lands. So these are the intrepids. These are these daring characters that they're willing to risk their lives in the adventures. But I always like to say that we don't really know how a human being becomes a traveler. This is Alexander von Humboldt, and I'm going to try to explain how we travelers are born. Where do journeys exactly begin? There is something in common also along all travelers, and it's the act of seeking. But seeking what? Every journey begins with this question, this abstraction, this idea that presumes that somewhere, usually far away, there lies an answer. But yet the question is not even clear. And I'm pretty sure everyone here listening to me has this question. And this question is not clear. And it always demands a very important effort of our imagination. But this is exactly where journeys truly begin, not in the road itself, but in our minds, in that question, in that effort of our imagination, when we decide that we have to go out there to seek for that answer to a question that we are not even sure. But let's analyze some examples. For some important travelers around the world, this feeling is this traveling starts with a feeling that is buried in their memories and resurfaces years later. From Melville, for example, the author of Moby Dick, the spark came from an engraving of a whale hunt that his father had brought back from one of his trips to Europe. His father was an importer of curiosities to sale. And that is this engraving of a whale hunt was the spark for that great travel book that is Moby Dick. But if we talk, for example, about Bruce Chatwin, the English traveler and writer, it was a childhood wonder, a spark by a really little scrap of dinosaur skin he discovered in his grandmother's house. And that eventually drew him, when he was 20 years old, to Patagonia. And we have in Patagonia one of the most important books written about this area of the world. But we also have Marguerite Yourcenar, who was deeply marked by the restless life of her father, whose footsteps she longed to follow. And when she was a grown-up, she made Greece her chosen homeland. So we also travelers, we decide what our homeland is going to be. And there's actually too many other writers. This is one of my favorites from the 19th century. This is Stendhal, the author of The Red and the Black, who became a traveler because of the beauty he discovered in Italy, the art, the ruins, the landscapes of Milan, of Rome, of Naples, of Florence, but also because of the allure and the beauty of the Italian women. So there are too many reasons and too many curiosities we can point out for people becoming a traveler. But this is my favorite one. For others, this is a kind of, how to call it, as a revelation. the sudden awareness of journey. And this is something that is very, very difficult to explain, but we all travelers, we have felt that in the road at some point of our journeys, this sudden awareness of the journey. And this happened to Saint-Exupéry, this pilot and this writer, the author of The Little Prince, who said he felt it under the starry night of the Sahara Desert. And I'm pretty sure all of you listening to me, you have felt the travel, the journey at some point of the route. Kapuscinski also felt it. And Kapuscinski is the great journalist of the 20th century, great writer, recognized this feeling, and he felt that he would later, something that he later called the contagion of travel, a space, something like a force that compelled him to keep moving across the world, and he couldn't stop it. And Alexander von Humboldt, as I said before, this Prussian also confessed this feeling, and he said this was inexplicable and something that pulled him towards the unknown. There's a word for this in Germany, and the Germans call it Fernweh. Sorry for my pure German. And this is the longing for distant places we don't know, but we feel that we are pulled toward those places. But he was also a traveler that was seeking knowledge. And he explained that he devoted his life to journey in search for the knowledge. And he said that he traveled because there is neither one person nor one place where we all knowledge can be found. So that's why he traveled. So for very, very early on, we human beings understood that by moving, we will better grasp the world and its people, and that motion was going to help us make reality more comprehensible. So through travel, we crafted our first philosophical explanations. We conquered our territories, we developed the first maps, we explored different horizons, and thanks to travel, we mapped that world, and even we stepped beyond it. This is our first spacewalk, and we are already traveling outside our planet. So we are always like moving these boundaries farther and farther and farther. So, in fact, there are both history of ideas and history of humankind are endlessly in depth to human movement. Some examples: the population of continents, it's because we traveled. We travel, and that's how we confirmed that our Earth is round and actually flattened at the poles. And we wouldn't have Darwin's theory of evolution without traveling, and the space age, the space exploration, we going to Mars and different corners of our galaxy if there's no travel. And also we owe to travel the scientific method because Descartes wrote it after too many years traveling. And also every food revolution we have had, from Alexander the Great, coming back from the India with, for example, beans, and Columbus bringing from America the tomatoes and the potatoes, and every Arab that also traveled the world with coffee beans. So we have too many depths to these people that have traveled. And it's also important to say that there is no journey without purpose. We travel because of necessity, seeking better conditions into places we can settle, or by this desire to discover or to learn. But every displacement carries a purpose: to trade or to explore or to learn or to colonize or to pursue the exotic, of to rest, of to encounter others, of actually to turn inward and to look ourselves inside. So humankind has always departed with this aim, this journeying across landscapes that may be physical or imagined or profoundly interior, but we all travel with a purpose. And I'm going to flow from the beginning of times when we start traveling to modern times. And I'm going to start this timeline with these earliest humans because they traveled because they were seeking food and shelter. And they moved according to climate, and they moved through during the last ice age with these mammoths and these rhinoceros and these tigers driven by hunger and cold. But they were nomads, they were the first travelers, and they live, their lives depended fully on nature. But I love to think about them because their homeland was the entire earth. And in this way, they reached their condition of Homo sapiens because we were moving and we walked straight and we discovered fire during these travels. So that's how we reached our condition of Homo sapiens. And these hunter-gatherers, they traveled within the rhythm of the seasons or the cycles of the plants. And sometimes they were forced by different, very difficult conditions, but also they were seeking knowledge. To survive, they needed a detailed map of their territories, and they need to understand how fruits grew and the habitats, the habits of every animal around. And they had to know which foods were nourishing and which to use when they were ill, and which plants could heal them. So they learned to read the signs of floods and of droughts. And through these journeys, they studied every river, every tree, every animal, everything they have around, and they knew their environment and their natural world far better than we do, because their very survival depended on it, as Yuval Noah Harari says in this amazing book called *Sapiens*. But we not only learn to read our environment, but we start to we turn into artists and also into musicians. Music and art were part of these journeys, because we start painting in the walls of the caves, and we start playing music, because in these caves we have found not just the paintings, but we have found, for example, these little flutes that were made of bird bones and mammoth ivory. And these little flutes are around 40,000 years old, and this was to accompany these sacred rituals. So this is how travel started. We were moving because we were needing better conditions. But 5 millennia ago, there was also this king named Gilgamesh that reigned over the Mesopotamian city of Uruk. And soon he rose as a hero and also as a god. And his deeds made him the central figure of the world's first epic, the oldest epic we have, a tale moving around his search of immortality. And this is the first written story we have as human beings. And also, this is a journey. This is the Epic of Gilgamesh that is written in this tablet that is in the British Museum. There are 12 tablets that we can read the Gilgamesh poem. And this is the first written literary tale, the earliest epic, and the first story in history to follow this arc we use in narrative, that is the beginning, the conflict, and the resolution. And it's also the earliest record of the archetype of the hero journey, a heroic figure that has a companion at his side, like Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. Also, the encounters with supernatural beings, the search for magical objects, the conquest of dead, the descent into the infraworld, into the underworld, in order to meet important people that is already dead, and the ordeals that set by gods and by monsters, the punishments and the rewards and the marvels and the miracles that we've been reading about since Gilgamesh. So this is also a depth we have with traveling, the first epic and the earliest written literary tales. So when the dawn of the first civilizations, the nature of travel actually start changing, and once humanity settled, journeys turned towards the discovery of the others. And this discovery was really important, but we also have here the first traveler known by his real name, because Gilgamesh, we don't know if he's a god or if he's a myth, but this is a real hero, a real traveler that is called Harkhuf, and he was an official. He worked for the pharaoh, for Pepi II, and he explored the lands beyond the Nile, and he brought back the fauna, the flora, and actually he brought back to Pepi II, pygmy. And he made 4 journeys, in part trading, in part as a diplomatic mission. But the thing is that his travels are carved upon his tomb. So he's probably the main character of the earliest known document that narrates a real journey. So 4 real journeys, and we can read them in his tomb. So this is amazing because it's like the first document we have of travel narrative with actually a travel that we know that he exists. So we can see also in many Egyptian tombs, we can see wild animals in these tomb scenes as exotic trade goods, because this was sent to Egypt from the surrounding regions such as Nubia and the Levant. And in the tomb of Raqmir, for example, a vizier during the 20th dynasty, we can see the depictions of people that were foreign, for example, black people, but also a giraffe, a cheetah, a baboon, bears, horses, monkeys that were brought as a tribute to the pharaoh. And it's amazing to see how every single time in history from then to now, we are bringing as a souvenir the rarest things, the exotic things, in order to prove that we've been to those places. But also in the antiquity, death is one of the humanity's greatest concerns, was always linked to the idea of travel. As you can see here, this is one of the depictions of the Book of the Dead in ancient Egypt, and it's because if we said that life is synonymous with journey, also death, or at least the passage through it, towards it. So the other great journey that art reveals to us in ancient Egypt is the voyage to the afterlife. This is the Book of Dead. This is like one of the chapters of the Book of the Dead. And in Egypt, Egyptians took it with them to the tomb, and it was a true travel guide. This is the first travel guide we know about. This is the travel guide to the eternal life. This is amazing because it was very extensive. Some of the surviving papyrus copies extend up to 40 meters. And it was very expensive because Egyptians, even from the lower classes, they paid the scribes almost half of their annual salary for it, because no one wanted to be buried without this book, because it contained every formula you needed in order to survive in the afterlife. And you can find this book in tomb walls, in the sarcophagi, in the mummy bandages, and the funerary objects. And this is key, the key that opens every door in the afterlife. So the Book of the Dead, long before the medieval codices for pilgrims that were traveling to Santiago de Compostela or to Jerusalem, this was the true forerunner that for travel guides. And you're going, if you're going to start this master in travel journalism, one of the things you can write is travel guides. Because why I said that this is the first one, because it contains, as any travel guide today, all the procedures and all the instructions of how to behave in the underworld and how to overcome the dangers. And as much as a lonely planet, for example, today, story explains to its readers how to obtain a visa, which vaccines are required, tips and surviving, how to survive heat and mosquitoes some places in the world. So we're going to change now to a different world. We were in Egypt, and then we come to Greece, the other great civilization of the ancient times. And for them, for the Greeks, journey was meant for the hero to be transformed. For the ancient Greeks, travel was a mythical experience, a trial imposed by the gods, and a sacred duty, like a passage where you have to prove and test yourself. And if you survived, you were going to emerge transformed, endowed with new skills and wisdom. So the worth of the journey was weighted in the suffering. How much suffering can you stand? And the hero had to prove himself not only in strength, but also in virtue. And that is why the archetype is Homero, it's Ulysses, it's the Odyssey, because he is the one that came through this horrific journey that was La Odisea, you know. So for them, for the ancient Greeks, we have that they were very, very enthusiasts of freedom, of beauty, of knowledge, but their spirit was marked by curiosity and the desire of exploration. At that time, the understanding of the world was pursued through philosophy and through travel. So that's why we have Homer, and that's why we have Odysseus or Ulysses as the main archetypes of travel and traveling and travelers in universal culture, because the protagonist of the Odyssey was like the one with all virtues, and also not so many virtuous things, but every single little guy in Greek studied the Odyssey, and children memorized it, and it was recited at festivals as a kind of Panhellenistic Bible, an encyclopedia of the mythical and everything that you need to know in this archaic world, and every knowledge you need was in the Odyssey. And that's why we see in art too many pieces that are going to depict the travels of Ulysses. But also, journey is a source of knowledge, as we said, as a source of information, and there is where Herodotus is going to appear. He's the father of nearly all sciences related to travel. He is the father of history, anthropology, ethnography, travel journalism, chronicle, reportage. He was like this Greek travel par excellence, and he's like this man, flesh and blood, you know. So he traveled to verify what he have heard. This is amazing, because he heard something. Okay, I'm going to go there and try to prove if that's right. So, and he also traveled with another amazing idea. He wanted the time would not erase the history of humankind. And that's the reason he traveled. And that's one of the main lines starting his book. So he journeyed through much of the known world of his age. And to him, everyone was barbarian, except from the ones he knew. So it's amazing, because all the information he gathered was the one he wrote in the 9 books of history that we now have as like the standard, the first ones, and like fathers of, as I said, history, anthropology, ethnography, and all. But there was also this great kind of science in ancient times that it was called paradoxography. And this was part of the Greek desire to discover the world. And these were testimonial or scientific tests infused with imagination and fantasy. But this genre was developed in Greece after the conquest of Alexander the Great. And it consisted in lists of curiosities, which Greeks reported because they considered marvelous or out of the ordinary. So this was a practice that took place until the late 3rd century before the Common Era. And it was a literature devoted to collect what then we said and we called mirabilia, the fantastic curiosities, the monsters, the miracles, the wonders around they were gathered in small narratives and some scientific reflections, and it contained the latest scientific discoveries that they thought that they were like marvelous of out of the ordinary. And for example, this illness that is called elephantiasis, first they thought that this was like monsters with very, very big feet or testicles, but then they understood that this was an illness, and they were collecting all these materials. And this is kind of an ancestor in some ways of magical realism. And it's also amazing because all this material was gathered through travel. And that's why paradoxography can be considered another precedent of travel literature and travel writing and travel journalism. But just as information comes from travel, so does misinformation. Because we have, for example, Scylax, the Carianda of Carianda, who was the first Greek author to conceive India as a land of marvels, a territory that continues to fascinate us today. But he was sent by Darius to the Indus as he was considered one of the explorers more likely to tell the truth. But he actually, everything he wrote was fake. And every fabulous creature we have heard about in very well-known accounts of India since then, like monsters with just one head, pygmies, ceapods, the men with a single foot, or the macrocephaly, the one with enormous heads, and the troglodytes, well, it was our friend Scylax who wrote about this. So we as travel writers, we have to be very careful about what we write, because these mistakes, the mistakes or the fake tales we tell people can be there for more than 20 centuries, and we can still talk about them. And there's also, this is Setias of Cnidus, who also wrote too many tales about India. And he was born between 450 and 398 before our Common Era, and he was a physician. And then he actually someone demanded him to write a book about India because they thought he had been there, and he actually never traveled to India. And instead, he collected all the curious stories he had heard about those territories at court, and that's what he wrote. So the same as Scylax of Carianda, he wrote about people with very, very big heads, just one foot, or the head somewhere else, or for example, dog heads of human people. But this is not just for then. In the same way, for example, I'm from Colombia. I was born in Colombia. I'm half Colombian, half Spaniard. But in some way, Colombians today, they are misrepresented abroad because of travelers too. And sometimes Colombians are seen only as narcos, drug dealers, and sometimes even movies depict Bogota with chickens wandering the streets. So misinterpretation and misrepresentation of places is a challenge we travel writers face through our work. There's also when Alexander the Great and his men returned from their expeditions, they landed with too many novelties, such as rice and beans and pepper and ginger and sugar. But there was this guy called Nearchus, that is one of Alexander's greatest officers, and he sailed from the Indus Basin to the Persian Gulf, and he was commanding the Macedonian fleet. And he came back with all these descriptions of geographic and ethnographic tales that were very interested. People, the wide audiences were interested in these tales. But he actually reported not just natural phenomena, but also the encounter with enormous, big, very, very big monstrous creatures. And sometimes it turned out to be nothing more than whales, you know. So that's how we've been writing about travel from truth and also from too many lies. And then we're going to Rome. After Greece, we are going to Rome, to the ancient Rome. And travel was travel meant their conquest and the expansion of territory. We have Adriano and we have Julio Cesar. And when we think about the Roman Empire, we are thinking about arcs and colosseums and all the streets and all the infrastructure the Romans had. And the fascinating culture of the Greeks left a profound influence in their neighbors, especially in the Etruscans and also the Romans, who borrowed many elements of their art, of their religion. And as soon Rome became an empire, they start building things, the aqueducts, the roads, the amphitheaters, the baths, the great civic architecture we know about the Roman times. And from this legacy comes that what we know today, the greatness of Rome. But just a little example, and let me explain why I'm talking about concrete building in a story of travel. And it's that because Romans, for example, introduced concrete into their architecture, and architects were freed from the limits of the rectilinear forms that they inherited from the Greeks. And this allowed them to build bolts. And this was very important for architecture around the empire and around the world. And they carried these bolts everywhere else. And why we are talking about this in a history of travel? It's because travel is also about the influence that people exert upon one another. So carrying with them their expansion and their architectural models and their art and their techniques and their materials and their gods and their culture. And above all, they traveled and they expand their idea of beauty. So that's also related to travel, because if we have the Arc of Titus in Rome, we are going to have the arcs in Orange in France and too many arcs around the empire in Europe. But if we have the Roman Colosseum, we are going to have a Colosseum also in Nîmes in France, in the south of France, and the Pont du Gard also in France, and the Aqueduct of Segovia also in Spain. And the same way, we are going to see Vietnamese people wearing jeans today, or we are all testing different foods that come from too many other cultures, and we are all eating hamburgers around the world. So the exact same thing, and the ideas we travelers carried with us and bring back to our places that are going to help us understand the world, but also we are going to bring too many things to the place we live. So we're going to move also in time and history, and we're going to set us in the time where Rome falls and Greece ceases to be what it once was. And it comes the time of the barbarian invasions, and the center of the world shifts to the Golden Horn, to Constantinople, to the Byzantine Empire that start ruling the world from the 4th century onward. And we're going to see that it's going also to start what we call the Middle Ages. And the Middle Ages was also a time of endless journeys. We have pilgrims in search of purification, and the Crusader Knights that were joining pilgrims in their journeys. And these adventures became one of the earliest modern models of this kind of books, of the adventure books that were related to travel. And then we have the Vikings traveling around, and so did the kings and the chancellors and the ambassadors. And we have these itinerant courts and we have the scholars, the wanderers. We have actually beggars and thieves along the roads, because this was kind of a punishment if you robbed and if you were a thief. One of the main punishments in the Middle Ages was to send you in exile to road through the world. And artists also traveled a lot, and these artistic influences also traveled, and there are very important travels to, for example, me nowadays, I'm studying these travels, the artist travels in the Middle Ages, because there has an enormous impact in the art history. But the Arabs also developed in this time, not just in the Christian Middle Ages, but also the Arabs developed the finest instrument for understanding the world and for navigation. And we owe them the first accurate maps. We owe them the astrolabe and the discoveries in the scientific and in the cultural fields that carried from the that were carried from the Arabian Peninsula to the Iberian Peninsula, passing and crossing through North Africa, and that's how these discoveries entered the West. But it's very interesting because at the time, the Arabs had these very well-developed maps, like accurate maps. We in Europe, we have these visions of the world that were more imagined than real. For example, this is the Hereford map, from around the 13th century, the 12th century, and it has Jerusalem in the center, but it is surrounded by too many physical and real and actual geographical landmarks, but yet the map is also filled with mythological beings like giants, like unicorns, like sirens, and like men without heads, like the ones we saw this guy wrote and placed in India too many years ago. So in Europe, we have this like imaginary vision of the world, while the Arabs had these accurate maps to travel the world. The Arabs were the ones that developed the greatest instrument for understanding the world and for navigation, because for them, we have not only the instruments and the astrolabe and all and the maps, but it's because they also traveled because they dominated the Silk Road, and the Silk Road was a road for trade, but also for culture, but for espionage and for art development and for scientific inquiries. And they were also driven by this desire of discovery. And we also have a very important tale that is Sinbad the Sailor, that stands out at the prototype of the Arab traveler. And also, as I said, art was traveling through all the Silk Road. And for example, when we take a look to the Chinese porcelain, we can see that this impacts also the porcelain and the pottery that was developed in the Abbasid world, in the Arab world at the time. And under its influence, they've refined it, these clays and these metallic glazes and these motifs and the inscriptions in cobalt blue. And as you can see here in this pottery of the Islamic world, we can see the calligraphy of the Arab world and the world. So the impact of travel, as I've been saying throughout this masterclass, is enormous and in too many fields. I can see the impact in art, I can see the impact in literature. For example, the carpets is also very, very important. They traveled as a gift from the Arab world to the ambassadors, for example. This is one of the most important pieces of the British Museum. This is the ambassadors painting made by Holbein. And as you can see this carpet from the Arab world in a table with all the instruments to travel. And these guys are called the ambassadors. So this was an age of too many travels. And there's this great traveler from the Arab world that is called Ibn Battuta that said once, traveling leaves you speechless and then turns you into a storyteller. And that's what you're going to become if you start this master in journalism, in travel journalism. And even Batuta, who traveled in 1325, is one of the characters that we can put there as an example of what happened in these times. It's from the 10th to the 15th century, there was also in the West and in the East, like a golden age of travel, where kings and nobles and diplomats and clerics and adventurers and wanderers left too many written accounts of their journeys. So we have a lot of travel literature to study from these amazing places and times. But the greatest one is Marco Polo from Italy. I always like to quote St. Augustine, that once said that the world is a book and those who do not travel read only one page of it. So if we think about Marco Polo as a reader of the world, he was an excellent reader of the world. And his chronicle, the chronicle of his travels to the East, the Book of Marvels, the depiction of the world, the description of the world that he wrote, the marvelous tales of Marco Polo, are his recounts of 24 years of journeys between 2071 and the 2095. So it was like 17 years. He served at the court of the great Mongol emperor, the Kublai Khan, and then the time it took him to go to that court and to return to Italy. So this is one of the other amazing tales we have from the Middle Ages. And then we have all the merchants, and the merchant travelers were the first importers of the exotic. That means that thanks to the expansion of the trade routes, hundreds of species arrived from the East, used as natural pigments, for example, for these amazing paintings. And for example, we have the Italian colorists from the Renaissance painting with very vivid colors just because they have these new species they used as pigments and natural pigments. And also from the colonies and the Americas, they brought some tiny parasites that grew in the cactus, and from these little parasites they developed the carmine red that was one of the most prized colors among the European painters because it was very, very vivid red. And also we have the lapis lazuli, the blue, the ultramarine blue. And the ultramarine blue changed art history, for example, because ultramarine blue comes from this Latin meaning that means beyond the sea, the distant origin of this precious stone. So everything changes. It changes because we've been traveling and bringing stuff from one place to another. For example, this amazing vault of the Scrovegni chapel in Padua, in Italy, painted by Giotto di Bondone. It was possible because of this ultramarine blue, and also this Wilton diptych that is in the National Gallery in London is possible because the ultramarine blue came to Venice from the very, very far away lands of Afghanistan. And also, we owe to travelers the depiction we made today of the Virgin and the Child, because, as you know, Egypt was once conquered by the Romans, and then these little pieces that depict the Egyptian goddess, the wife of Osiris, and her son Horus. There was these little statues in Florence that were brought there by the ancient Romans, and this became the iconography that Christianity adopted to represent the Madonna with the Christ child. So many things we owe to travel. And also we have the travels of Marco Polo being absolutely indispensable for Columbus to discover America. What you see in the screen is the book of Marco Polo with Christophilus Columbus notes in these pages. As you can see that he was trying to discover every single thing that Marco Polo have seen. So he was going after a book, something that someone wrote years earlier, and he was seeking not America. He was seeking what Marco Polo have described in the book. And that's how, just because Columbus read the book of Marco Polo and he followed his path, as I said, we travelers are sons and fathers of other travelers. He followed his Marco Polo's path, and he discovered America. And what followed was the age of discovery, the discovery of America, the discovery of Australia, the discovery of the southern seas, and soon to be followed by the time of great scientific explanations and meticulous accounts of the natural world newly revealed for them. So we are going to see different tales, because we are going to go from the time of the East to the time of the West, from the age of caravans to the age of caravels. So we are going to see different tales. And 30 years later, Juan Sebastián Elcano and Ferdinand Magellan, they completed the first circumnavigation of the globe. The 500th anniversary we recently commemorated. And this is going to expand the boundaries even further, as they confirmed that the earth was indeed round, as I said before. So we now are going to pass through times where the printing press started to spread news about the distant realities, and travel became the focus of interest, and the copies, the manuscript copies, weren't an obstacle anymore, and they start like rising the interest of the public, and readers began to prefer travel books over all the adventures of travelers around the world. So this is called the South Sea bubble, because we are going to see like this proliferation of scientific journeys and tales of the world, but in an actual real way, how the world was. And everyone was very, very interested in knowing how Australia, how the southern seas were. So it was the dawn of the age of the scientists, of the geographers, of the naturalists. There were too many circumnavigation of the world, along with tools of measurement, the sextant, the sea charts, the magnetic compasses, crowned with the wind rows, the maps, the planispheres, and the world expanded with every discovery. And it was the time to measure, to touch, to see, to observe directly the world. Everything was guided by science and by experience. And this was this desire around the world, around travelers, that they wanted to be witnesses of the world, to be there, to traverse distant lands with new eyes, and to bring back useful data. So travelers were kind of transformed into reliable witnesses of the world, and they travel itself began to resemble the scientific method. So we are not just talking about tales from India and monsters and people with just one foot, but we are going to start to be witnesses of the world, and we inherit that spirit. And for example, Captain Cook, James Cook, fulfilled this purpose of travel as a scientific method, and he went in his travels with botanicals, with scientific people, and he brought back detailed botanical, zoological, and geographical reports. So between at his time, he confirmed, for example, the existence of Terra Australis, of Australia and New Zealand, and he mapped the entire coastline. And he, as a sailor, he proved the existence of the great ice barrier surrounding all the South Pole, and he discovered numerous Pacific islands. So we are here in front of a traveler, but also a storyteller, but also a scientific guy who, for example, when he arrived to Hawaii, 10,000 natives received him and his crew as if they were gods. So it's also the encounter of the others that is very important for us as travelers. And you can see here, for example, the drawings and the pictures and the art of William Hodges in the Tahiti Bay, because they arrived to Tahiti. And this is how, because there were no photographs at the time, so this depiction of the world, we also owe it to the travelers. And these are the resolution and the adventure, the great ships of Captain Cook with these fishing canoes in the Matavai Bay that Gauguin, then when he go to Tahiti, he depicted. So this is how we knew the world. But then we are going to, very, very soon, is going to come and arise a sense of exhaustion of this time of reason. We are going to feel this exhaustion with the encyclopedia, and the heirs of Newton believed that they could gather all knowledge into encyclopedias, into world maps, into manuals. But there's some other guys that were trying to say that you can't, that it is impossible to understand everything totally, and reason is not enough. And these two models emerged and they entered in conflict, because one of these models was obsessed with the explanation, with books, with tools that help us transform, master, and comprehend the world. But in the other hand, we have these guys that said that there's an important place we have to give to subjectivity and to feelings, and what we feel and what we sense about reality, and to contemplate nature as a refuge, and to exalt the emotions of our soul. So there is where Kant comes, and at the end of the 19th century, and we are arriving to the end of this timeline we are building here, and we have the Industrial Revolution that took place in England, and the ideas of the Enlightenment, and the revolution in France that collapsed with the rise of Napoleon. And now this romanticism arise and they start taking shape. And the idea that was growing around is that not all questions can be answered through reason. And this gave rise to the philosophy of idealism, which recognized that it's very important, the subjectivity, and this defined this period. And we have the critique of the pure reason wrote by Kant, and we are going to start articulating the failure of positivism through his discourse of the sublime. And what is the sublime? The sublime is the romanticism. The sublime is that which is immeasurable in nature, that those things that surpasses our human capacity of understanding and learning, is every time we are in front of these beautiful landscapes and we said, I can express this in words. So that's what happened. And this sublime feeling, these people like David Hume, for example, explaining that knowledge is reached through the sensory experience, through the aesthetic pleasure, and through the senses, not through instruments. And Schiller saying that the path to the intellect is opened by the heart, and the most urgent need of his age is therefore to educate our sensibility. This is a completely change of times. And this change came, and there was these guys like, for example, Alexander von Humboldt, these anthropologists and these naturalists that arrived, that were hires of the ancient explorers, but they're going to start merging in their figures the rational inquirers, the scientists, but also the intrepid adventurers, the heroes capable of great quests. And they began their project of measuring and mapping the natural world, but they also were infused with this aesthetic vision and this sensibility. And that's why Humboldt is so important, because he's the hire of all that tradition of science and enlightenment, but also he was placed in the center of the crisis of reason. And he therefore is like a hinge between the Enlightenment travelers and the Romantic ones. Because when this time came, Alexander von Humboldt is going to be the greatest and most famous scientist of his age, and he was called the Shakespeare of sciences. And at his time, he was the most renowned man after Napoleon. And he was like a true homo universalis, a polymath, the ones that wisdom and talent was applied across all arts, sciences, and humanities, because he was a geographer, he was an astronomer, a physicist, ethnographer, a zoologist, a climatologist, an oceanographer. He was a mining engineer, he was a cartographer, he was a geologist, he was a botanist, he was a volcanologist. So he was a scientific adventurer who filled thousands of pages in his quest to unreveal the laws of the universe, with all those hidden connections behind every phenomena. And to him, the world brimmed this absolute fascination, from the lichens to the stars, from the fire of the volcanoes to the excrement of flies. So this is a complete change of times, because he's not just a rational thinker, because he was also, for example, a painter, and he was painting. And for example, in his book, in Cosmos, he dedicates a chapter of how the influence of landscape painting, it's very important in the study of nature. So he's a very, very different guy. His diagrams and his drawings are also the precursors to today's data visualizations that we use a lot in travel writing. He's the father of infographics, of graphic information systems, and that now are a global trend. And actually, also, his drawings stand in their own right as work of arts. So that's why we travelers do. That's what we do. We travel, we draw, we take photographs. We have companions, like, for example, this is Aimé Bonpland, the friend, the greatest friend of Alexander von Humboldt, the one he went to the Chimborazo. And from that on, everything what is going to be illustrated, we can't conceive a travel writing, a travel piece without drawings or without pictures, because people want also to see the world. And his drawings, Humboldt's drawings, became an inspiration for Codazzi, for example, here in Colombia, both in the maps and illustration. And he was an inspiration for too many scientists around the world. And it was the time when too many Europeans were starting to travel, for example, to Latin America in the 19th century, and they start like witnessing like the birth of all these nations here in Latin America, and they start they start to write in diaries and in chronicles and records of their scientific expeditions, and in paintings, details of this land that was like in their earliest stages. And every discovery and every thing that they saw that was new, the fauna, the flora, and everything that was like unique for them. For example, the hammocks. And that was very, very fascinated. They were fascinated with the hammocks here in Latin America, but they also leave all these travel tales because they were undertaking expeditions, they were measuring the mountains, they were opening roads, they were classifying plants and animals and species, and they were mapping all these young nations. And at the same time, they were facing the diseases that were typical of the tropics, and they were being witnesses of the civil wars that were shocking all the South American continent during this century, and they were like exploring everything that was new for them. So they were only they weren't only traveling because they want to gather data, but because they want to embrace nature in their fullest dimension. For example, when Humboldt went to Tenerife, he wrote that the Teide, the ancient Teide, offers little as a subject of a scientific inquiry, but yet it's very rich in the picturesque delights of one who knows how to feel the magnificence of nature. So all these travelers were traveling not only because they want to gather information and something that is about the intellect, but they were also traveling because they want to contemplate the world. And they were also very physical travels because they were putting their bodies at risk because of the illnesses, because of all the different conditions they were facing. So then we have the most important hire of Humboldt, and that time was absolutely Darwin, who said he would never have boarded the Beagle nor written the origin of the species without first reading Humboldt's Voyage to the Equinoctial Regions, Cosmos, and his personal narrative. When Darwin arrived in Brazil, he declared, "I am here because I read Humboldt. He, like no other sun, illuminates everything I see." So Darwin kept the books, the Humboldt books, in the shelf beside his hammock on the ship, and he used them as a model for his own writing. So that's also something we owe to travelers and to these amazing scientifics and adventurers around the world. And he even drew on Humboldt's style the shape of the theory of species. And as I show you the Marco Polo book with this handwriting of Columbus that is nowadays in the General Archive of the Indies in Sevilla, in Spain, the Cambridge Library also holds a copy of the Alexander von Humboldt's book written by Darwin in his margins. So this is amazing because it's like we are hearing a dialogue between those writers. So in order to finish, I'm going to tell you just like this 19th and 20th century part of our timeline, because a new philosopher turned away from all that objectivity of the previous century and ultimately established the subjectivity as the new center of the existence and thought. So Romanticism emerged as itself as the expression of the European spirit at the beginning of the 19th century. Is art for art's sake, is travel for travel's sake. We are just travel because we want to travel. And Romanticism is above all a feeling, and it stands in opposition to the academic painting of the academic writing, and it was considered, the academic was considered very rigid and very constrained, and it was very important for all these romantic people to travel and to walk and to evocate the landscapes in order to write about a new spirituality dimension of landscape. And because they start talking about landscape as a religion evocation because of the grandeur of nature. Because here, for example, in this painting of Caspar David Friedrich, you can see a pilgrim here and a cross and a cathedral at the background. So it's very important because we have the painters, but we have the travelers, but we also have all this landscape painting that was then minor genre, but the romantic spirit elevates it as a new dignity. And for example, William Turner, one of the greatest painters of all times, he was also a traveler, and he travels in order to paint better the storms. And his vision of nature was so sublime, as I said before, and it's also monumental because in his canvases we can see men as diminished before the vastness of the landscape, and it's confronted by the sheer power of the ungovernable of nature. So it's a different feeling, it's a different way of traveling, traveling, and they were turning their look to the past, to the ruins, to Greece, to Jerusalem, to other mythical places, especially to the Orient. And travel was crucial because of travel, it was possible to visit these sites, and at the same time, it became a metaphor for life in the age that was very preoccupied with human finitude and the longing for eternity. So the romantic is, by definition, a traveler, and that's the sentiment, the feeling of the 19th century. So travel continued to be a method of exploring the world, but no longer the scientific purposes were there, but rather in search for answer along paths more inwards than outwards. So the romantic conception had prevailed, and there was no longer an effort to describe places in an objective way, but instead to capture the emotion and the beauty of the landscape. And there was this certain feeling of melancholy that is amazing in all this century. And there was also this among them, the exotism was very important. They embraced all these travels to North Africa, to the Entente Americas, to the Orient, the land of light and color. And they start looking to this world not exactly in an objective way, because artists and writers and travelers, they were traveling with their imagination to these cultures more than truly observing them. And they were intoxicated by their exotism and their women's and their myths and their daily life. And they poured imagination into their portraits and into their travel tales, because they were evocating all this sensuality that was not necessarily real, but is the one that Europe was longing for. And they turned this into what we call now Orientalism, that is like depicting the Orient in a very fake way. But as we said, not only information comes from travel, we also have misinformation and misleading tales, because we are going to see too many harems, too many odalisks, too many naked slaves, too many Turkish baths, yet no one of them had even set foot there. So they were like imagining these places. These were the fantasies of Europeans that were seeking to escape from the industrial Europe, from the Industrial Revolution, from the strikes, from the factories, from the machinery of actually a very deep void in Europe. This was what they were escaping from. They fled from the factory and the machine, the working class, the overcrowded cities, the plague, the human costs of industrialization. So we have mass production and mechanization and markets and very cheap labor, and cities grew very modern, very urban, but people suddenly had access to multiple products they can now afford, but at what cost, you know? So this is the last part of the 19th century, and at the beginning of the 20th century, there were untouched territories that were untouched by this kind of progress. So, for example, the United States, they saw it as a kind of promised utopia, an unspoiled land, a blessed new nation. So, for example, the British start traveling there, and they portrayed this perfect paradise with mountains, with landscapes and touch, with this nature instead of the ruins that they were seeing in Europe. So we have, for example, Gauguin, one of the great painters of the 20th century, of the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 18th century. And we have Gauguin in that period that he had this childhood in Peru, and he lived a lifelong return as a foreigner everywhere he went. He went to Brittany, he went to Copenhagen, he went to Martinique, he went to Tahiti, and he was a traveler that he was not only a painter, but he was like this guy trying to depict the paradise. This is when he went to Martinica and how he depicts it. And his voyage to Tahiti was like a passage to the absolute, to the very origins of times, of humankind, a journey that would transform him into the master of the modern painting, but also into a travel writer that told us how all these native cultures were touched by what they called the modern world, and they were destroyed. And the destruction of all those cultures, it turned him into a missionary in reverse. He allowed himself to be turned into a savage in order to find through them the innocence of vision, the sinless erotism, the fragrance of paradise, the true freedom. And that's why many people find in his art their own moment in paradise. And that's why we love Gauguin, because he's one of the painters that depicted the last paradises that were left in the world. But because what Gauguin found in Tahiti when he arrived in 1891 was a tragic place, a colonial land with where native population was devastated by disease, tuberculosis, and by war and by alcohol. And they were just a fraction of what they have been, and they were subjugated by soldiers and missionaries, and Tahiti was not the romantic heaven to escape from civilization, but were the place that revealed what Europeans could do upon encountering native cultures. So it's very important to look at these pictures, because the opposite of this virgin paradise in the late 19th century and the 20th century was the landscape of modernity, the city, the modern life. And here is where we have the dandies, and here is where we have the flaneurs, the urban strollers that wanders the city, that they're writing about cities. The cities are the metropolis are the new jungles, and they are explorers of the crowds. We have Walter Benjamin, we have Baudelaire, for example, of the greatest examples of flaneurs, the ones that were writing about the cities. And we have also, I'm going to go fast here in order to finish, because we have also the great painters of this time, Monet, Manet, Renoir, that they were depicting how the world changes, and how, for example, in Europe, the bourgeois life took hold, the consumption and the spectacles and the arcades and the shopping halls and the shopping centers. And it was to keep the bourgeoisie in check, and to consume with delight the opera, and people to forget about politics and to lose themselves into entertainment. So that's the modern we inherit, and that's the portrait of the modern world we have from the Impressionists, and that we have from Monet, Manet. And then we come to the 20th century, where travel would be marked by the horrors of the two world wars, by migrations, by exiles, that are the great themes of our century. So we travel writers, we are going to write about war, about exile, about migration, about all these complex situations of the 20th century, not just we writers, but also artists and photographers, and everyone is going to depict the horrors and also the other different meanings of travel in our time. So I would like to finish by saying that travel is more than an act. Travel is a sensation, travel is an emotion, travel is a spirit, and it leaves a trace and a mark on ourselves. Traveling is a singular but a transformative experience from which no one emerges untouched. And at times, sometimes travel, it's also a wound, a scar. When we travel, we are not untouched by travel. Not the world, not us. And in a world of borders and walls, in the one we live today, too many artists are trying to name and to capture the dramas that resist to be named, and that has been the immortal and the immemorial task of art and literature, that is to depict our world and to tell us about everything we can't understand without travelers, writings, and authors. And with the rise of the middle class and the spread of globalization and the advent of low-cost airlines, travel had transformed into an industry, and that's what we know today is a mass phenomenon. The Romans were actually the first vacationers, because wealthy families they were riding this carriage to the Gaul and to the Danube lands around the 2nd century. But tourism as a phenomenon today is this modern sense of traveling was born actually in the 18th century. But now we have the roads, we have the hotels, we have the railroads that help us to shrink the distances, and the industrializations of cities. So by the early 18th centuries, excursions started, spa retreats, rail journeys were already on offer. And after Second World War, we have tourism gaining full force in Europe, in the United States, and then the rest of the world, when the working class too began to enjoy holidays. So this is a new phenomena. We have a very, very different shapes of what is tourism, what is travelers nowadays. But I'm going to go fast just to tell you that what's the place, or what is the role of travel in the 21st century, is that we travelers, the spirit of the traveler, represent one of the best ways of being in the world. It's one of the finest ways of inhabiting the world nowadays. We travelers, we have, as we've seen through all this master class, a passion for freedom, a cosmopolitan vision of the world, the awareness of an open world but still waiting to be discovered. We have hospitality. We have the will to embrace others in their difference, knowing, as Descartes once said, that they are also sons of reasons, and humankind is sustained by our capacity to keep seeking and forever pressing against the last frontiers. So travelers, we are indispensable, because we are the ones that are going to give voice to others, and we are the ones that are going to try to understand through encounter. And this is a desire that is tragically very, very rare in our contemporary world. And just the last slide, I want to quote Saramago, the Portuguese writer, that he wrote: "When the traveler sat upon the beach sand and said, 'There is nothing more to see,' he knew it was not. The end of a journey is only the beginning of another. Always the travelers return to the road." And also Ismael in Moby Dick echoes that thought. The end of a long and very dangerous voyage is but the beginning of another, and when the second one is done, a third commences, and so on endlessly, world without end. And I'm going to tell you, just to finish, that any work, any painting, any book, any masterclass, like a journey, reaches its close only so that we can start the next one. One frontier is crossed in order to seek to the next. No world is ever complete, and the artists, the travelers, and we too, we go forth in search of new horizons to map. Many, many thanks. I'm very happy to be here. I'm sorry for the delay. Thank you very much, you all.